Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a Triad production. I'm your host, Dr. Graham Taylor. On our show today is Jon Zeitlin. Jon is a co-founder of HabitCoach, where he helps teens and adults with ADHD develop executive functioning skills and strategies. A three-time chief executive and senior corporate leader, Jon has personally overcome his own executive function challenges and ADHD symptoms, building compensatory mechanisms to succeed in both his career and in his personal life. With degrees from Yale and Stanford, Jon brings a wealth of experience and insight into ADHD coaching, while also being able to be a dedicated father of three, including one child with ADHD. Through HabitCoach, he is passionate about sharing his knowledge and creating effective resources to support kids and teens with ADHD. We're excited to have Jon with us today to explore the creation of HabitCoach, how it addresses the shortage of ADHD support for kids and parents, the executive function challenges that it targets, and the program's unique approach to building lasting habits and integrating parents into the process. Jon, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
It's nice to have you. So Jon, as I shared in the intro, you personally overcame your own executive function challenges. You're very forthright about this, and ADHD symptoms through the building of compensatory strategies, which has allowed you to clearly succeed in both your career and I'm assuming in your personal life as well. What gaps were you seeing for parents and kids dealing with ADHD that got you thinking that, hey, I could share these same skills that I developed for myself with them? What brought you into this?
Well, there's really just a shortage of good services of well-trained people in this field who are pediatrically oriented, who are working with kids and teens. And I'll just quickly tell you a little bit about my own story. So I was born in 1965, and just to kind of put that into a time frame, so Driven to Distraction, the book by Hallowell and Rady that kind of brought ADHD to the attention of the masses, so to speak. That wasn't even published till 1993, I think, or 1992. So I was already 27 by then. So my generation, nobody knew what was going on, right? And so I was lucky in that I was pretty good at school, but I lost things all the time. I was disorganized. I was the kid that I did the homework and it never got out of my backpack. And people thought it was funny. They would tease me. They would call me an absent-minded professor. And it wasn't until I got into my professional life, into my late 20s, that I started, kind of flattening out my growth. And I was like, what's wrong here? And I went to a psychologist and they said to me something that's always stuck with me, is very profound, which is your brain's really good at some things and not so good at other things. But the things you're not so good at, you can actually improve on. And nobody ever had said that to me. It's a simple message. I've been working in this field for a while, and for HabitCoach, where I really got to design the program that I really have been thinking about and really love, I was really wanted to do something so we could get to kids, because kids who are early identified and early treated with coaching or therapy, medication, the combination of those, they can go on to have great, great lives. And so we just saw this gap and this need. We did a lot of early market testing, and there's just a lot of interest and demand from parents and kids for a program that really, really focuses on the needs of both kids and teens.
Really good. As you're talking about the habits that can be developed and built that allow, we'll talk about some of the success it allows for, but it's, when we talk about the ADHD, we're talking about some challenges within the executive function portions of our brain. Take a little lap with us here. When we're talking about the executive functions, that portion of our brain, what are we referring to here?
Well, I probably, a lot of your listeners know this, but just put very simply, executive function is just the set of thinking or cognitive skills that you need in order to accomplish a goal. And there, sometimes depending on how you list them, there may be 8 or 10 or 12, but I like to think of them as 3 groups. It's easy to remember things in threes, right? So for me, the first group is what I call the ADHD classics. So those are things that people associate with ADHD, like losing things, memory issues, organization, planning issues, prioritization issues. So that's group 1. Group 2 are procrastination. And there's really 2 set of major procrastination issues. One is trouble with getting started on things. We call it task initiation. And the other is kind of focus and follow through, the ability to not be distracted and get a task done. So that's group 2. So the ADHD classics, procrastination issues. And then the third is what I think of like as the higher level executive function. So those are things like emotional control or mental flexibility or self-awareness.
Yeah. Those executive functions are pretty important parts of our day to day, aren't there? I mean, you're talking about things that involve working memory, inhibition, or cognitive flexibility, planning, organization, problem solving. And like you're saying, they really help us manage our daily tasks. They help us make decisions and regulate behavior and in our day-to-day functioning. And they play a really critical role. And with children, you're talking about, and all of us really, whether it's academic performance or workplace success, or even in our interpersonal relationship, these executive functions are pretty critical parts, aren't they? And the habits around them.
Yeah. And there's studies that have been coming out in the last few years that are showing that having strengths in executive function is actually a stronger predictor of adult success than academic, which is counter to the way we all think. We spend all our time with our kids helping them get good grades. And this is sometimes secondary, but it turns out it's critically important.
Yeah, I would almost liken that to what we refer to as emotional, our emotional quotient, or EQ, where people can be really, really smart and bright, but they're only as good until they go through a stressful time and they collapse. If they don't have that emotional, maturity, they don't care how smart you are, you're going to collapse. And, when the water starts to boil. And so I like the idea that, we can help kids very early on to develop these habits that are really critical. You talked about in your 20s, you begin to kind of flatten out a little bit or kind of round out. And that typically is when our mid 20s, 25, typically is what people refer to. That's when our executive function part of our brain is, pretty completely developed. But until that time, we're vulnerable to those executive functions not being what we need them to be. So you're saying while the brain is still developing, we can put these habits into place that allow for success. That's a pretty important emphasis here.
Yeah. I mean, I work personally as a coach with both adults and kids. And like my mother, who was a violin teacher, I prefer to work with kids because it's so much easier to make progress. So I do love working with adults, and I work with men in particular, but they've got decades of these kind of behavior patterns that you're trying to undo. With kids, of course, like you said, just neurologically, there's much more neuroplasticity and just they're still making their way in the world. So we start at age 8 at HabitCoach. So we do 8 to 18. And so we have clients who are, in elementary, middle, and high school.
What do you see? You talked at the beginning, some of the challenges you see come through the door, but what are some of the challenges you're having folks typically share with you?
I mean, it's really all over the place. So we always start with an executive function assessment. So this is different than an ADHD assessment. We're not trying to do diagnosis work here. We do the therapists do that work, psychologists do that work. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get very much more specific, which is what are your executive function strengths and what are your executive function weaknesses? Those are both important because the work we're doing, just put simply, is teaching kids how to learn to play to their strengths and compensate for their weaknesses. So you can see immediately in that, first or second session, when you're sitting down with a child and you're looking at their assessment and you're asking them, okay, it looks like that you're having challenges with planning. Can you give me some specific examples of what that might be? And they'll have lots of examples of ending up doing their homework, staying up till 2 a.m. because they, weren't able to plan it out over a week, as an example. So you can see the challenges very, very quickly.
So it sounds like part of that assessment gets to take a look at things like maybe listening skills or their procrastinative tendencies, or like you're saying, time management, or the way that they might organize or plan certain things out that might be challenging, or maybe like you mentioned, you probably did this great work, but it didn't get out of your backpack. So the idea of keeping track of stuff, maybe getting schoolwork done and I would imagine relationally, that's an area too, or maybe in some of the emotional management piece or the distractibility, how to kind of have habits around these things that allow them to be in the world in successful ways.
Yeah. Let me just discuss sort of some of the educational behavioral underpinnings to the program and then how it kind of turns into an actual service. Yeah. So like I said, like the psychologist said to me, what you're trying to do is learn to play to your strengths and learn to accommodate for your weaknesses. And so to accommodate for your weaknesses, people always want to talk about that, even though the other is equal or more important. The way to do that is you have to go from kind of awareness or education through practice all the way to habit. Okay. And you're trying to get to habit where there's no cognitive load to be able to do things. So I'll give you a simple example. If you're the type of person, if you leave your house and you always leave your keys behind or your wallet behind or your phone behind, you might have a mantra for yourself. It might be wallet, keys, phone. You might sing it, wallet, keys, phone, right? Whatever it is, any, device that you have to remember this. And so you'll practice that over and over and over again to the point, if you really do this, and this is what's happened to me in my life, is if I walk out of the house with one of those missing, I just kind of know it now because I've been working on this for so long. It takes me no cognitive load to remember these things anymore. Right. So that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to go from education to practice to habit. Now, let me just explain a little bit how we do that. So on the education side, we have a curriculum. It's a very complete curriculum. We have 80 lessons. For each of our lessons, we have older kids version, a younger kids version, or we're continuing to add to our curriculum. And the lesson looks like, it always starts off with a scenario. It's like a story. So it kind of depersonalizes it for the kid to say like, oh yeah, that happened to me as well. And then we kind of do a little bit of instruction. Like, let's say it's, losing and finding things. We might talk about, well, one of the biggest reasons that people lose things is hyperfocused. They're thinking about the class they're about to get to. So they leave their water bottle on the playground by accident. And then we talk about strategies. So just picking up that example, a strategy might be when you go to play basketball at recess and bringing your water bottle because you live in Arizona and it's ungodly hot. And you, instead of putting it where all the other kids put their stuff, where all their bags are, put it right by the opening to the basketball court. And then when you leave, you literally have to walk over it and you'll see it. Right. And so we found through a lot of work and through the research that we've read is that the strategy that sticks is the strategy that the kid finds for themselves that works for them. Right. Sometimes they come up with strategies that we haven't even thought about. But once they come up with a strategy that works for them, then we need to go from practice into habit.
We'll be right back after word from our sponsor.
Americans are increasingly concerned about mental health, with nearly 9 in 10 voters seeing it as a crisis. Mental Health First Aid provides crucial training to identify, understand, and respond to mental health and substance use challenges. Gain the skills and confidence to offer life-saving assistance. We offer courses for individuals, groups, and organizations of all sizes, including specialized training for veterans, law enforcement, EMS, and educators. Visit mentalhealthfirstaid.org or email hello@mentalhealthfirstaid.org to schedule your training and make a difference in your community.
Really good. You know what I like about what you're doing too? It's so hard. We have some ADHD in my family, and it's easy to feel like that person's being blamed, they're being lazy, they're not focused, and all these labels that get kind of put on them. And what you're doing right here that I love is you're reframing these things to say, hey, we're going to play towards your strengths. And we're going to find some compensatory strategies, some habits we can put into place to help you manage those areas that maybe aren't quite as strong. So you can be successful in these areas of life that you need to be successful in. And, habits are typically thought of as behaviors or actions, like you're saying, that are performed almost, like you said, without much load, without much cognitive load being necessary. This happen automatically and consistently. And like you said, they develop through becoming aware of them and repetition and becoming ingrained over time so that they just occur without conscious thought having to be there. So take us through just a little bit more of the curriculum. You're identifying some of these things with the kids and you're framing it in a positive way and you're saying, hey, we can get a handle on this. What else are you doing at that point?
So when we do a lesson, like let's say losing and finding things, the lesson will just be the introduction. Like I said, then we need to go from kind of the learning into a habit. And so one thing that we do that's pretty different than a lot of other programs is that we have these things called check-ins. Mm-hmm. So additional up to 2 times a week where they're short, like could be as short as 10 to 15 minutes, where you're checking in with the student, the kid, if they've been able to start taking some of these habits they're trying to build and put them into practice. We have this thing on our site. We've built a platform, a supporting platform. They're called habit cards. And so we've gamified it a little bit. So a habit card might say, I'm going to put my water bottle by the entrance to the basketball court. And I play basketball every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So on the habit card, it's going to describe that. And it says Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And so the assistant coach who does the check-ins will say, hey, I saw with your coach that you set this as a habit card, as a goal you want to get better at. So today is Tuesday. Yesterday, did you do that at basketball? And usually the kids are going to say, oh no, I forgot, because we just introduced it to them.
Right.
And then the system coach, oh yeah, no problem. That's great. But when are you playing basketball again? Again, tomorrow. Okay, great. So here's another shot at it. See if you can remember it tomorrow. And so, this is stuff that parents do, of course, as well. Right. But with parents, it's hard because it's your own kids, right? And your kids are pushing, the older they get, the more they're pushing it back against you. I mean, I have 3 teenagers. It's so much easier for me to coach other people's kids than my own kid. But having these coaches, assistant coaches, is really, really helpful. They have a little bit of a remove, and they can really remind these kids without it feeling like nagging. Our coaches really all have deep professional backgrounds in this area. They're people who've been either therapists or special ed teachers. We have somebody who was a school principal. So we have people who really know this stuff well, who have been, trained thoroughly in this coaching. But they have sort of like the platform and the curriculum as sort of a framework underneath that they work from.
That is really a thorough approach in the curriculum. And I love the people you're describing. It sounds like they've got a real passion for and a real kind of knowledge base that they bring to this. You're talking about something around these habits. Everybody asks, and you kind of hear these different things being said. How long does a habit take to create? Well, is there any answer to that from your experience? How long does it take to create a new habit?
I think there's obviously a range. The fastest would be a month, and the probably slowest, it could be as long, it could literally be 6 months. Like you could keep on working something for months and months and months.
Yeah.
For my own self, I was saying, in my late 20s is when I started realizing I had some things to get better at. I didn't have a coach. There were no coaches in those days. I wish there were, right? So I had to figure this out for myself. And I would say it probably took me 5 years to the point where I was, consistently on time for meetings, where I wasn't interrupting all the time, where I didn't make as many detail errors. To this day, I'm not perfect. You're never going to be perfect. But I got to the point, which is what we're trying to do with our students, is get to the point where it doesn't get in the way of what they're trying to accomplish in life.
Yeah, I like that. It's funny because when you put it like that, we're going to have some response. I'm going to put my water bottle someplace. I'm going to show up to the meeting at some point. But you're saying, what if we do it in a way that allows you to experience some success, not lose your water bottle or be there on time? You're going to have some behavior. Why not have a habit of doing it in, let's say, right ways? And if we do this consistently, repeatedly, then that becomes our go-to. That just becomes what maybe once upon a time would be showing up late, or maybe interrupting, or putting my water bottle in the wrong place. We're going to do these behaviors anyway. Why not have a bunch of habits, like you're saying, set up that allow life to go in really good ways? So I think that's a pretty cool approach. You also mentioned, John, the role of the family in this and bringing family integrated into this process of the coaching too. What is their role and how do you work with them too?
Yeah, you're not going to get anywhere if you don't have the family at the table, the parents at the table, or grandparents, whoever it might be. So from the very beginning, we're meeting with the parents. Typically for older kids, it's going to be a once a month meeting. And for younger kids, a lot of times it's just for like 10 minutes after every session. And so it's really important that the parents know what the work the child and the coach is doing. And it's also important that kind of, the same messages are going out. And also that from the parent standpoint, that they realize the coaches are relieving some of their load. And so they, loosen their grip a little bit. So it's really a triangle of the parent, child, and coach that is effective.
That's a nice balance. You mentioned working with teens uniquely. Teens, and when we come into our teen years, we want to try on some things ourselves. We want a little more independence and autonomy. And it sounds like part of the art in this as a habit coach is recognizing and kind of empowering the teens to be a part of identifying ways that they could do these new habits and maybe going with those for a while and encouraging those. What are some of the examples that you have of teens and some of the things you're trying to work on and how you approach them?
Yeah, I love working with teens, and we love working with teens at HabitCoach. So first of all, it's important that teens have a safe space. So we tell the parents, like, we're not going to tell you everything that your child says in session. I was working with a teen the other day. We were talking about reading for English. And I was saying, he's a junior in Palo Alto where I live, which is a very intense school district. And, he's reading these big books. And I'm like, so do you actually read any of these books? And no, I don't. And he said, I said, do your parents know that? And he said, no. And I said, okay, well, I'm not going to tell them that. But why don't you read these books? And, and And we had a good conversation. How many of your peers actually read the books or do they read Spark Notes, right? That sort of thing. So we had a good conversation. It kind of ended up with him saying, I used to read when I was a kid, and now that I'm in high school, like once I got a phone, the reading went away, but I really miss it. And I would say, well, maybe over holiday break, you can have that as a goal to read a full book over holiday break or in the summer or something like that. Like he wasn't going to tell his mom, I'm not doing any of the reading for my English. I'm finding other ways to get a good, to try and get the grade in. But he was finding that fine to tell me because there was a safe space there. It was a good, healthy conversation.
And you're helping him find a way to be successful with his tendency to kind of approach his subjects in this way. You mentioned the role, not to go too far down this path, but you mentioned the role of having a phone or electronics. So how does that play out with this group?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the phone for kids with executive function challenges or ADHD, this very powerful computer that we all walk around with is both your best friend and your worst enemy. And so there's, of course, a lot of conversation right now about banning phones in schools, which I get because teachers are having a hard time teaching. What we teach at HabitCoach is that over time, you need to learn how to master your phone habits. Like their phones are not going away. It's stuff that adults struggle with as well. And so a phone is your greatest friend in that you use it for alarms, for reminders, your digital calendar is on there. I mean, for me, that was actually my number one tool that got me organized and successful. So it is really, really important tool in the arsenal to have a phone. At the same time, it's working on, like I like to teach kids about how to set limits for themselves. That's a lot of what we do at HabitCoach, which is to say, how many hours a day do you think you should be on your phone? And if you ask that to a typical teenager, most of them are not going to say any more than like 2 hours. And then you say, okay, great. Well, do you want to set limits on your phone? With a younger kid, of course, the parent needs to be more involved in that conversation. But as the kid gets older into the teen years, to kind of put it on them is good because they're going to be gone in a few years. And so you're really in those high school years working super hard to get them to take responsibility for themselves.
As you see them do that, develop these habits and some of the disciplines around them and the successes that they're beginning to experience, what's some of the feedback you hear from them as they come back and say, hey, my water bottle, you never guess where I put it? Or what are some of the things you're hearing?
Oh, it's great. I mean, you can just see kids' confidence growing, right? Like it's really frustrating to have ADHD or really to have executive function weaknesses. It's easy to get down on yourself. And when you start turning it around, and sometimes the work goes pretty rapidly, when you say somebody's saying, I used to procrastinate so much and I'm getting much better now. It's like, you can just see it. It's pretty easy. We do some measurement work in HabitCoach where we reassess and we see improvement of symptoms, but qualitatively it's just, you can see it and the parent can see it pretty readily.
Yeah, that's really good. We know that, those that kind of have ADHD or experience some of these things, these are the ones that are often referred to as the explorers and the adventurers and the entrepreneurs and the ones that are going to go out and test limits and see things. And who are some of the successful people that you've seen develop these good habits or maybe worked with? And what are you seeing them accomplish maybe in their lives because these habits are in place, they're bright, and they can kind of channel and direct these things now to reach their fullest potential? What's happening?
Well, there's often a role model right at home. So often it's so genetic, these issues, that so often somebody has a parent who has ADHD as well. And many times that parent is successful in life, right? And they've probably done the work either consciously or subconsciously. So sometimes that's a good way to talk about it. Hey, tell me about your dad. What do they do for a living? How do they do it? And even if the dad is struggling a little bit, in general, there's a role model. But then there's also, of course, many famous people who are like well-known. The founder of JetBlue, David Needleman. So he's, I guess, the inventor of the electronic ticket. And he's a guy with bad ADHD. He's talked about it publicly a lot. And he's a guy who learned how to play to his strengths. He learned that he was an innovator. He learned that he was a leader. He learned that he was a people person. And he found, for all of his weaknesses, all of his kind of, like I said, ADHD classics of organization and detail, he would find somebody to do the operations and to do the detail work for him and who could be his partner in that work. So there's many, many examples out there. And if you say to a kid or a teen, now that you understand this stuff, just kind of keep your eyes open because, by the way, it's almost 10% of the population who have ADHD. So there's examples all around.
Yeah, I like the way that you normalize it and kind of take the stigma out of it or depathologize it in a way. say, hey, it's basically some strengths you've got. Let's play to those and some areas we can compensate, even if it means maybe as a professional, bringing somebody in to do that kind of work that's kind of humbug, that's not bright and shiny and not any fun at all. Let's bring those people in to help you, compensate for those areas that may not be your strengths or an area of liking. And let's take your strengths and really maximize those to the best of your ability. I know that you've experienced some really high success with gifted children who also have ADHD. How do you tailor your program maybe specifically to meet the needs of this group, Jon?
Well, so the parent company of HabitCoach is called Testing Mom. It's a company that's a leader in gifted education. We've been around for almost 20 years. And so we have a whole staff of people who are really expert in working with gifted kids. Now, gifted kids test at almost double the amount of ADHD as other kids. So they test at about 15% compared to 8% for other kids. And so you get a lot of these twice exceptional kids who are really, really gifted academically, but have really strong executive function challenges. And there's just not that much out there for these kids. And so for example, some of our coaches actually double as tutors in our gifted program. And so they know how to both deal with a kid who's doing math 4 grades behind, but also is struggling to get their work done. This is me, by the way, when I was, and they didn't call it, nobody called it 2E. Nobody knew what that was. But as I look back up I'm not off the charts, but I definitely was very strong at school and very weak at executive function. So I really have a soft spot for those kids. We are lucky because we grow out of the Testing Mom company that we really have great expertise for kids like that.
That's really good. Along those lines too, I want to plug this book you're writing, this fiction book.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
For middle grade readers about 3 generations of ADHD stories. Tell us about this project.
Oh yeah. This is a labor of love. It's sort of like my early morning project before the kids are up that I've been working on for about a year. And so I wanted to write a book where there was a lead character, ADHD character, because there's just very, very little of that out there. So Percy Jackson, you might know, Percy Jackson, he's the Greek Gods series. It's a very popular middle school book. He actually has ADHD, but I've asked people about this. They're like, do you know that Percy Jackson has ADHD? And they're like, what? I didn't even realize that. I read the whole series because it's sort of a secondary thing for him. So there's very few characters in fiction or in even TV or movies that have ADHD. There is starting to be some like Extraordinary Attorney Woo and a couple more TV shows where there are lead characters with autism. So I think ADHD is coming, and that's what I'm trying to do with my book. Is I'm trying to write a book for the kind of middle-aged kids where they really are seen and heard. And I'll just tell you a little bit about the book if you want me to.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about it, please.
Yes. Okay, so it's a really fun book. So it's set in 2 parts. So the first part is set in the 1970s, where I grew up. And the main character, Stu, he's sort of like a composite of all the people in my generation, which is he's got bad ADHD. You can tell it in the first scene. He's being chewed out by a principal in the first scene for all these issues. And the principal just is saying like, you're an underachiever. What's wrong with you? You did incredibly well on your board scores, but your grades are terrible and we're going to kick you out. It's just like, it's like kind of really exemplary of what happened for people in my generation. And so the first part of the book is sort of like a will he or won't be get kicked out of that school. Then we jump ahead to I think it's 2017 is the part 2. And Stu is now a parent himself. And this is my kids' generation. That's how that kind of gave me, of course, and my clients' generation. That's what gave me all the fodder for that, writing that part of the book. And so Stu, unfortunately, is still in denial. He's undiagnosed and he's in trouble. He turns out he's in deep debt to the mob. The Boston mob. It's all set in Boston where I grew up. And his son, on the other hand, is really doing much better. He was diagnosed. He's getting coaching. And the first scene is at a 504 meeting with a very kindly counselor who really understands these issues, who are saying like, you're starting high school and that's great. We've got all this support from you. So it's night and day from the scene you would have seen, 35 years earlier. I won't give it all away, but in about 6 or 7 of the second part of the book, Stu, the father, is found dead in his office. Oh. And then the rest of the book is sort of like the Hardy Boys, if the Hardy Boys had ADHD and were funny. So his son, Jake, and the grandpa, Morris, have to team up and solve the dad's murder. And so the idea here is that for Jake, and his grandpa, of course, has ADHD too, because it's so genetic. That comes out very late in the book. But it's basically this idea that like you can have ADHD and have all these challenges and still be incredibly successful, even as much as solving your dad's murder.
Even the murder mystery is being solved. I love that. What a fun project. I think you had mentioned, you're talking about the son here in the story. I think you said you had 3 teens right now. Is that correct?
Correct.
What's their thought and their feedback to you on your work and you being in this field, and what's their feedback?
Well, one of my 3 kids. So I have a 18-year-old who just graduated from high school, and then I have 14-year-old boy-girl twins who are in high school. And my younger son, the one who's a freshman in high school, he has ADHD, and he's a little sick of me coaching him all the time. He kind of like knows all. He like knows the book because he lives with somebody.
He's like, come on, Dad.
But I think I've helped him. We've also gotten quite a bit of, we've gotten professional help from him too, because there's only so much you can do as a parent. And I think the other 2 are happy. Like I said, it lives in our family at my generation and the parents' generation. And so our kids have some awareness actually that this has been a challenge for some of the like aunties and uncles and people in this kind of, in that generation. And so I think that they love that that I'm working in a field that is important to me and that is making a difference. Although sometimes my son Eli is like, come on, Dad. Okay. How many times have you told me how to not lose things?
I've got it. It's become a habit. I'm okay.
That's
good. That's good. Well, hey, we're going to have you back on the show. I'd love to have you be part of our clinical series down the road as we maybe take what we're saying today and have you maybe take us down the path of the curriculum, letting people know what they could expect if they were to bring their young child or their teen to see you, or adults as well that would come to see you and talk about how habits get formed and what the coaching looks like. But for today, we're kind of winding down, but I would love folks to be able to learn more about you. Tell us where they can find more information about you, the Habit Coach, and access what you're doing.
Well, it's just very simple. Just go to HabitCoach.com. All one word, HabitCoach.com. And then once you get to the website, it's really easy to use. You can get more information. You can get a free assessment. You can, give us a call or send us an email and we'll set you up with a coach.
Really good. Well, I so admire what you're doing. I think good habits allow for consistency and good routines. And like you're saying in our show today, enhanced productivity helps us reduce stress too, funny enough. We have a sense of control, and uncertainty and anxiety get managed as we increase our sense of control and being able to kind of manage life successfully.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important thing for young people and for all of us really, to have a sense of control of our lives. And we can actually do that through good habits. And that allows, like you're encouraging us to see here, personal growth that we have the potential for and long-term success. And I think ultimately kind of an emotional well-being that can foster, resilience and positive outlook on our lives. It seems hopeful. And I think in essence, cultivating good habits lays this really cool foundation for a healthy, productive, and fulfilling life. So I so admire, Jon, what you're doing. And it's been wonderful to have you on the show today. We look forward to having you back to talk a little bit more about what it looks like when it's actually happening.
Okay. Thanks so much, Graham. I'll be happy to do a return visit, and I really enjoyed our conversation.
I sure enjoyed it as well. Thank you again.
Okay.
Also want to thank you, our listeners, for dropping by and joining Jon and me today. It's always great to have you with us. Regarding our episode, I want to remind you that it and its resources and all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. Thanks again for being with us on the show. And we'll look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.